All right, guys. My name is Brian Vosper. I'm here with Norm Kurland. We're doing our third podcast. This is the Just Third Way podcast. Norm Kurland and I, we're going to be talking a lot today on tax reform, how it applies to the Center for Economic and Social Justice. What are their suggestions? Just kind of looking over what happened in the past, maybe that wasn't too much of a success with taxes, what's going on now, because it's a huge debate, maybe what are some pros and cons, and maybe some suggestions to kind of open your guys' mind, see what we can do to make this a better solution. And so, just introducing Norm again, he is the president of CESJ, the Center for Economic and Social Justice. He has a lot of experience in this field, so the first thing I wanted to ask Norm is a tricky question. This is the $1 million question. Just kidding. Why do you feel that current tax reforms today, Norm, aren't really good approaches? Or like from the past in the U.S., why do you feel like they haven't worked out too well?
Well, I think the tax system ought to be a system to pay for the legitimate costs of government. And to me, it's overly complex, and even the reforms that they're talking about are not really true reforms. So we have to figure out how to achieve a just market-based system where all citizens would have equal opportunity to be owners. The present tax system doesn't do very much for that, except for something that we were able to get through the Congress back in 1974, and that was the employee stock ownership plans. There you have a tax system that's working very brilliantly when it comes to workers in the private for-profit sector, but it leaves out the nonprofit workers, certainly leaves out government workers, it leaves out the unemployed, it leaves out disabled veterans, it leaves out every woman, housekeepers, and it leaves out children. So the kind of tax system we would have, although it's not as important as the money system, which we can talk about, but the tax system is not opening the door. It creates barriers, and it results in the fact that 0.1% of Americans owe more than the bottom 90% combined. This can be corrected without taking property away from anyone. So it is a property-based system, but the present system, if I were to describe it in a nutshell, in Karl Marx, in his Communist Manifesto, said that you could summarize the entire philosophy of communism in a single sentence: abolish private property. And then he had 10 points. In our tax system, it goes along with Marx. It was a graduated and progressive income tax. We can have a better system there, much more simple system. And we could go into that. But in any event, I think it's essential that we have a better idea of what the tax system should be doing.
In your opinion, was everything that Marx did bad, or were there pros and cons to it, in your opinion?
I think it's very
just to help
basic
some people out.
that if you have a system where power is concentrated in what Karl Marx called the dictatorship of the proletariat, you end up with dictators, and they deprive people of fundamental human rights. On the other hand, I think Marx was right in being against monopoly capitalism, which is what we have. So therefore, we're talking about both a tax system under monopoly capitalism or a tax system under communism or socialism. Neither of those empower the many. It empowers a tiny fraction of people. The more you concentrate power, the more corrupt it's going to be. And you're never going to eliminate corruption, but the best approach to concentrated power is to demonopolize or pulverize power and spread it out. And power follows property, and therefore it's an essential point in understanding what is private property, and it is a way to get power to people over not over people, but over things, the natural resources, but more important in today's world, the advancing technologies like robotics and information technology, which is displacing many people from the forms of work, certainly in manufacturing work, but it's also going into other kinds of work.
Yeah. So to help you guys understand, because I'm still learning all this stuff too, CESJ, with going along with the robotics and everything, what they're trying to teach is that it is actually a fundamental human right to be able to own property. And what happens is that if you are truly an owner, you should be able to be an owner of what the machines are actually producing. Because what happens is, their argument is that if you aren't truly an owner, robotics and all the advancements that we're seeing in technology, you're going to continuously live in fear of your job just being lost to robotics. But by creating a system in which everyone can be at least a part owner in what those machines are producing, it's not like a communistic kind of thing or make everyone equal, but at least creates a system where humans are able to maintain that human right of being able to be owners, but they're actually entitled to those gains of what your company truly is producing. I think I said that along the right lines.
Mm-hmm. I think in many respects it was. The only thing is, there are two things. One, where you mentioned you own that which is produced. No, what you want to own is the means to produce marketable goods and services, so that in a way in which there's consumption incomes to buy, because the purpose of production is consumption. But the question is, why are we suffering from low growth rates when we know if you were in war you could have double-digit rates of growth, as we did during the Second World War? Now, why are we so slow? Why are so many people really not participating as they were before in terms of the percentage of the population? Why are so many jobs being eliminated by technology? So it's if we think about the system, first you have to produce and contribute to production. Well, if the only way you can contribute to production is through your jobs, when the technology is displacing those technologies. So it's the other things. It's the land and those new technologies that are making more and more the contribution to the production of wealth, the production of consumable goods and services. So if that is growing, well then, instead of a tiny fraction of people owning the assets, call them productive assets, capital assets, then we have to find a way in which, as you grow those assets, everyone has an equal opportunity. See, we want to, when we say equality, it's not necessarily equality of results. You're looking for equality of opportunity, and that's what America was. The founders were seeking that. They understood the importance of property, and so we have to enable everyone to participate in the production, both through whatever labor contributions they can make, and that should be valued by the market, and then whatever capital contributions. And we've done estimates of the let's call it the annual ring on the capital tree, that roughly every year $1, $2, $3 trillion is added, both in public sector and the private sector. So you want to make sure, if you divide the population into that, you're going to get something like, say, $7,000 of growth potential that can be owned by every child, every woman, every man. And it's that growth potential that if you own it, and that's a slow growth, it could be much more than that. And the question is how your tax system must be there to facilitate the use of that or getting to that $7,000 a year of capital growth that could be owned and produce incomes for people over their lives. And under what we estimated on our website, there may be a child born today would, if it were only $7,000 a year for 65 years of their life, they would accumulate close to $500,000 after taxes and get $50,000 a year in incomes. Wow. From that under the tax system that we would propose. But the most important, as I said before, is going to be how you're going to do that. How can people who have no savings become owners? And that's what we've been able to do with ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, so that workers have been able to buy out companies without putting up their own money, all on capital credit from banks.
Wow.
And there are thousands. There's something like 10 million workers have benefited, and some companies are better than others, and we're looking for improving that. But that's not the big picture. The big picture is universal access, and that we say you have to look at what we call you could call it an economic empowerment act, a set of reforms that in the United States we might call a Capital Homestead Act, because that's a frontier. That is, capital growth is a frontier that we have no limits to. And the more we could add, the more that people can produce through their ownership as well as through their labor.
Wow. Yes, these ideas are pretty powerful. I think what people would want to know, sorry, I said I think like 30 times there. What people would want to know is a little more on your guys' tax plan. Okay. So what is it exactly? Like, okay. Because as soon as you hear, so I'm going to be able to get $50,000 additional every year in addition to my salary for just this system,
or at age 65, it'd be about $1.6 million in income from age 0. It's exponential. It grows exponentially, and that's slow growth. That is the $7,000 a year. It might be double or triple that, because I think the reason you have slow growth is because there aren't customers. Because businesses can always produce if there's a customer or customers who have demand for whatever services or goods that you have. So it allows for a growth of America, but also America as a model for other countries in the world. We can't think in terms of just U.S. economy. We want to have a world where every citizen of the world can begin to acquire ownership of capital as well as contribute through their labor.
Okay. So how are you guys going to do that? What is your guys' tax plan?
Okay, the tax plan, that's a good question. It's a very simple one. Corporations would have to pay no tax if they distributed their profits. They'd get tax deductions for dividend distributions to all their shareholders, including existing shareholders, so that ultimately it would be taxed at the individual rate if the government got no receipts. If all corporations agreed, they wouldn't be forced to. They would pay corporate taxes if they didn't pay out their dividends. But if they did that, then all that stored up capital within the corporations, which are used to concentrated ownership and buy out shares from other shareholders. So corporations would have to decide. Smart corporations would not want to pay out any corporate taxes. So that's one thing that could be done. The other thing is you want to set a rate of taxation that will eliminate government deficits. And right now the deficits are incredible. We have a GDP, or gross domestic product, the production of wealth, is now $19.3 trillion, according to the debt clock, which you can get from the web. And in that, you see, it's that's the gross domestic product. But the debt is 20 trillion, or if you want to put it on a personal level, it'd be $62,000 per citizen. That's our debt, the federal debt. And we're increasingly dependent on China. China holds the largest block of U.S. Treasury paper, which is $6 trillion of the 20 trillion. So this is not a smart way for government. Government was the debt should have been, the only reason you have government deficits is you're not getting enough in your taxes. So our tax plan would be a single tax. But first, you instead of all the deductions and complicated provisions of the current tax code, you would have what's called exemptions for the individual, so that we're proposing an exemption of $30,000 of your first for each taxpayer, and husband and wife, let's say they each had $30,000. It'd be $60,000. If they had 2 children, they get $20,000 in addition. So they'd have their money to cover all their medical, their education, their food, their housing, their mortgage payments for houses, because houses are not unless they're rented out. Houses are just assets of a family that you borrow, but that debt is not a capital debt because it doesn't pay for itself. One of the things about finance is that you don't invest in anything unless it will pay for itself. How is that? Out of future profits. So you don't need past savings in order to become an owner. If you have credit, as you do with ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, they pay. The corporations pay no corporate tax. All profits belong to the employees through a tax-exempt trust, an employee stock ownership plan trust, and that's tax exempt. So that all the shares can be acquired on credit, and then you allocate shares to all the employees over the years it takes to pay off the loan, but it's all out of future profits. And so there's a fallacy that we deal with in the world of finance, that you can only finance growth out of past savings. It's not true. You can finance it out of future profits or future savings, so that the future profits first pay off the loan, and then you have accumulated shares. So you have assets now, where you didn't have it before. Well, that can be done for everyone. So under our plan, you would have something like an IRA, or individual retirement account. We'd call it a Capital Homestead account. We use the homesteading concept from what was done with land during the Civil War. That was a great act that President Lincoln signed, making available 160 acres of land to propertyless people. But that was a limited frontier, and that was at the time that the industrial frontier was really beginning to take off with railroads, manufacturing companies, etc. But it was a great idea, and it did result in America becoming the most prosperous country in the world. But still, now we're no longer in the same position of growth. And that's because of this new frontier that was displacing people at their jobs. So that now it wasn't just their labor, but all of the advanced technologies in the farms, obviously tractors and so on were added, cotton gins and various other tools that you couldn't do just labor alone. And that's the frontier where we have robots capable of manufacturing robots. Well, that's something big. That's something we all should be worried about. So the tax plan would enable people to acquire that. That is, they'd be able to first, let's say that $7,000 a year, they'd first be able to pay for the shares. You'd go to your local bank. The bank would set up a Capital Homestead account. It'd be a tax-exempt entity while you're accumulating or receiving a loan from the bank, and it would be paid for out of the full pre-tax stream of future profits of the company, because the company would be encouraged now. The only kind of shares you would buy would be full voting and full dividend-bearing shares. So this would be a transition in the kind of shares that would be dominant. Not shares for gambling, but shares that you would acquire for accumulating a capital estate and enabling all citizens to become economically independent for their income in the future. More and more of it would allow, and this again, you can't take the tax system away. The same thing with inheritance laws. Instead of taxing the estate of trillionaires, no, they can't take their capital. Private property is something that you can't take away. You shouldn't take away. But you want to enable everyone to have that right, just as the political ballot allows for political democracy, which doesn't work without economic democracy. So we're talking about how you build economic democracy so the government becomes more dependent on the people, rather than the people having to come to government and ask them to redistribute from the wealthy. But all that does is create a class war. But we have to win the war of ideas, and it's the war for justice. And it's a war of ideas. It can be peaceful. You don't have to take anything from the rich, but rather what you do, instead of having inheritance taxes and gift taxes, you would tax the recipient. So that if, for example, they had over $1 million or $2 million from the trillionaire, you tax what exceeded that. And in order to encourage people, when they make out their wills, to spread it out among their family, with the workers who help create their fortune, teachers, government workers, even politicians, disabled veterans, to anybody, and you tax all their holdings, that is the recipient's holdings, after they receive whatever they did, so that that way you would encourage people to spread it out, so that we move to the classless society. But the ordinary income tax, now that's another matter. You can have one that would allow people, let's say a family of 4, to have exemptions to cover their own living needs, but you only tax them above. Let's say the family of 4, every dollar over 100,000 exemption would be taxed at the same rate as you would tax Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and other trillionaires.
How much would that be?
Well, whatever.
I mean the percentage.
You'd first find what would government spend for, and certainly this is not to eliminate the welfare, the needs of the poor, yeah. And even in medicine, for example, even in looking at how people can be given vouchers, health vouchers, so that they can afford to buy health insurance. And we can even change the whole nature of how you finance or how you deliver health services. You can have insurance. You can have the doctors and their patients together, into what we call into a cooperative or a business that's partially owned by the health deliverers as well as the people who are subscribed to that plan. And it's a lot better than the current plan, because that one is first of all it is putting government into too close a role or too critical a role in the delivery of health service. The government it should be the people forming their health service system and their economic the companies and the nonprofits, whatever. But you see, eventually, more and more people, as they shift away from economic forms of work, because they're getting independent incomes from their capital ownership, they can go into things, all kinds of work. The unlimited, it's what Aristotle called leisure work, or the work of civilization. So that people go into music, can go into politics, can go into teaching, not for the pay that you get from being a teacher, but from their independent income from capital. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight, but in a generation or two, we're going to get people go into teaching at all levels. The university level, because you're not going to have people getting over $1 million being president of Leiden University. President of universities getting over $1 million. Well, you're going to get people then who are economically independent, who go into teaching because it's very critical, so that we can improve the quality of education and not have students have to incur all kinds of student debt, sometimes over $1 million of debt that they can't pay for under today's world. So we can solve that problem. Again, the tax system, but what we left out is the money system is the key.
Yeah.
It's credit.
I was just trying to figure out so do you guys not, because obviously when it comes to tax plans, like with the debate right now with Trump and everyone, do you guys not have a number right now on, so do you know what the citizens would be taxed? Like what number that is?
Well, as I say,
you said
only know the number if the tax rate would be that which is necessary not only to avoid deficits, you see, but to even begin to pay down those deficits, because those deficits, if you project it on current trends, the numbers I gave you before are about 20 trillion. It's going to be much more than that. There's a St. Louis Fed paper called Deficits, Debt, and Looming Disaster. Reform of entitlements maybe are the only hope. Now, this was written in 1908, and they were projecting that by 2080, you'd have much more accumulated debt, and we would be bankrupt. You wouldn't have the tax means to handle the debt, and but you see, we left out what's happened to the money supply because of concentrated ownership.
Well, Norm, wouldn't that mean that the number, you don't have a number yet, but estimated, if it's to be able to pay off the deficits, wouldn't that mean the taxes are going to be very high in the beginning?
They may be. So let's say they'd be 50% rather than 20%. Whatever it would take, it could be 60%. But the point is, everybody would have enough to be able to meet their own basic needs. That's where the entitlements, instead of deductions and tax credits.
Well, if you're paying 60% taxes, that's
of every dollar over 100,000.
Okay, so it'd be so basically it would be, in the beginning, it would kind of be taxing the rich, though, then.
Well, yes, it would, but again, and
60%, that's
high. I can justify that on the basis of justice. That the government, what is the government there for? Well, if we read the preamble, it says you're there. It says we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. So these are very important now. The next two words establish justice. They also provide security. So if somebody has $1 trillion to protect from foreign invaders or from whatever might destroy their property, they are paying a service charge for the additional security needed to protect their property. So this isn't to take away their property, but rather to say, yes, they may have to pay higher tax, but whatever that tax rate is, it should be justified on the basis of uniting the society without taking private property away from people. Their private property is going to be protected of the rich, okay? But they're going to have to recognize it's a bigger burden that government has to supply. But what you want to avoid, I think what's most critical, is that everyone should have ownership opportunities, equal ownership opportunities, including the rich. They can get their $7,000 a year along with everyone else.
True.
You see?
Yeah, true, but I'm just kind of trying to put myself in their shoes, you know? Because, for example, if I'm making like millions and millions of dollars yearly, and then that $7,000 doesn't really mean much to me.
Okay.
But at the same, and I want to help people out,
I understand.
and so I want to teach people how to become rich. But at the same time, like,
what are they going to do?
But
what are they doing? Look what they're suggesting.
Well, a lot of people are teaching people how to start businesses that are rich.
But that, again, to start businesses, you got to have customers. And
True.
So therefore, but on the other hand, what are they proposing in order to deal with a significant millions of a high percentage of Americans whose income is insecure under the present system?
Well,
let's first ask the question and answer it. They're coming up saying you ought to have a universal basic income. How much is that? Who's going to get it? Where's it going to come from?
Wait, who said this?
Well, Zuckerberg and a whole bunch of others.
Mark Zuckerberg said universal basic income.
That's their universal basic income.
What does that really mean?
Well, it
for
just
those
means
who don't
it
understand.
doesn't really. Right now, they're not being very much specific. But where can it come from other than from government?
Okay, so universal basic income, would that just mean like everyone's getting paid the same, or what does that mean?
Whatever they haven't gotten down to the details. They're saying, some say it's just for the very poor, the bottom.
That sounds pretty sketch right there.
So that not everyone would get that. But the point is, that's their solution for generating the consumption incomes for those who are not earning an income. Okay, so that what you're talking about, which I am very much in favor of, because what we're talking about is a way to get you capital, so that to the extent you have a feasible business plan, you will be able to engage in that.
Yeah.
You see, without savings, you may not have savings. So what we're offering is a tax system that would enable you to be successful. It's not taking it away from you.
True. The only pitfall I'm seeing there, though, is if you obviously, like, the numbers, it might not be 60%, like, because you calculate over the years how long it would take to pay off the deficits, and they're going up every year, so it'd probably be really high, to be honest. But the thing is that I can see as a pitfall is if the solution is at the beginning to tax the rich at 60%.
Yeah. Okay.
What if let's say all of them just leave the U.S. Okay. Then you're screwed.
No. Then who would be here in the United States? Let's say they left. They leave their what would happen to their?
So a lot of them do international business.
There's nothing wrong with that.
What if they all just?
But if they earn it from America, if they produce it in America, then America should be able to tax the income that they receive.
Well, if they live somewhere else, you're not going to be able to.
Where you live, it's a question of where you're getting your income.
True.
And so when it comes down to the rich, remember this: that the rich cannot consume all the income from the billions and trillions that they own. If they could, you'd have a growth society. In other words, they could spend, for example, one of the billionaires went and fixed up the Washington Monument. Okay, so he spent some money but that created jobs here. That created incomes for people to have to do the work here in America. So that what we want to do, I mean, if you're not taking away their wealth, you're taking away the income from the annual income that they are not spending. If they spent it here, then you'd have more jobs. But that's why we're looking for a way in which they can live as exorbitantly as they like. But part of that income is going to be taxed. Why? Because of what government provides them in the form of security services. You see? So that whatever they own, they're supplying police, they're supplying soldiers, etc., and others. So that we see, I want to be as concerned with you're pointing out the rich, you're sympathetic. What about being sympathetic for the poor? Because in America, everyone should be a person, is a person, and should have fundamental human rights. And if you want to look at where do you get those, just look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says everyone should have the right to become an owner personally as well as in association with others. But that isn't, you could declare that as a right, but no nation in the world has a tax system, and particularly a monetary system, that would enable everyone to become an owner without taking property away from existing owners.
True. I'm just kind of thinking like, it's kind of like you can teach a man to fish, or you can give a man a fish or teach them how to fish.
Right.
I feel like, because a lot of really rich people, they got there from hard work, period. A lot of them did.
Yes, no question.
And so there are some that, luck of the draw, but a decent amount of them had to work their butts off to get there.
What's the purpose of wealth?
Well, I think it's to, in my opinion, it would be to provide for my family and make sure my family is secure.
But is this, in any way, would we be taking away from the ability of you to take care of your family?
No, but at the same time, the thing is, the solution is, your solution in the beginning at least is to tax the rich a ton. And so what happens is, by just doing that, there are still going to be people, even those families, that aren't going to work that hard. And then you're eventually going to still run into that problem of what happens if the deficit gets paid off and you still have a bunch of people that aren't working hard. What's the solution?
What will happen to the rich if we don't create equal ownership opportunity? That's not results, but equal ownership is exactly what's happening in China today. And that is that those who run government, and remember that government is the only legitimate monopoly. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it should be competition.
Yeah.
Okay? So the government exercises the monopoly over coercion, the ability to coerce and kill. Now, if America goes the route of China, and I think that what you're suggesting, because you're not paying attention to most of the citizens, okay? They may want to be owners. That's great, and we want to make that possible. But most of them most Americans, as I say, a fraction of 1% own more wealth-producing assets than the bottom 90% combined. And this is worse if you look at the world as a whole. So what's going to happen if you don't is that people are going to form governments and take the wealth away from you. And there'll be no private ownership. You'll go the way of communism. And I think monopoly capitalism is the route to eventual state capitalism, collective capitalism. And that's worse, because there you're combining not only the power over the nightstick and the jails and weapons, but you're also creating you're creating a system that can only lead to greater and greater concentration of power. And the government, again, those who believe that government should have the power, which many people do, they turn to government. They're forgetting that if they become dependent on government instead of government being dependent on the people, you're going to have a totalitarian future for the world. Now, so you have to see this in terms of what's the alternative from a standpoint of justice. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's why the principle of justice, equal opportunity, you don't want to disfavor the rich. You don't want to threaten the rich, but the threat is there. It's going to happen if you leave out people. It will, and you don't want to worship the state. You want the state to deliver justice, establish justice for all. And so if what you're saying, whatever the rate is, let me tell you, as far as the rate is concerned, it may only be 40%. It may be 30%. As you reduce the costs of government for Social Security, Medicare, the military, and welfare of all kinds, as you reduce that, the cost of government will be what it was in the beginning, very minimal. So that the cost of maintaining a government, but it'd be a minimal government, because the power will be outside of government, the economic power. And if you don't think of in terms of economic power and how it's becoming increasingly concentrated, today the rich can get the laws that they want. And they can get that's the reason that neither of the two parties, neither the Democrats or Republicans, and none of the Green Party or the Libertarian, they don't deal with the whole issue of who should be owners, who should have the power, economic power. Okay? It's only the top. That's all they can think of in both cases. So you got leadership of all the parties, in one way or another. They're imposing on the freedom and liberty and justice that should be available to every citizen. We have to be the model. This is the model, in my view, other than slavery. This was the model that people like John Adams and Thomas Paine and others were talking about even before we reached the age of robotics.
Okay. I didn't mean to cut you off, but you were getting to the point of what is money. I didn't mean to throw you off of that.
Right.
I know we're trying to keep these around 50 minutes to an hour max.
Sure.
Let's get to that topic at least. There might be some things we're going to have to save for the next time. We wanted to get to talking about the Federal Reserve. One topic right now is who's up for re-election. We might be able to, but let's get to that real quick. What is money to you? Okay, to kind of clarify that.
Money, money is supposed to be, it's anything that can be used to satisfy a debt. And currency is only one form of money. But normally money should be very stable, that everybody understands what it is. Instead of it artificially being that is what stands behind the money, there always should be assets behind the money. But today, and it used to be, America had assets, or at least they can measure money, that for an ounce of gold, it was $32. But Nixon went off the gold standard, and America went off the gold standard in 1947, and instead what's behind the currency are not real assets. Yeah. Nothing, not land, not capital goods. Not the commodities that are being produced. Those are assets, That's the economic assets. No, behind the money now is government debt, because the government started, after the Second World War started, went into the New Deal. And the New Deal increased the role of government, so it began spending for things that were not available through government. What we want to do is reduce that, so that the government spending is much less. And the only way that's going to come is when people have independent incomes, everybody, so they don't need government. So this will shrink. So this is more, for example, the money that I gave you from conservative numbers, that you would get $50,000 a year after taxes. That's more than you're going to get from Social Security. You see? So you won't need. So what does that mean? And let me say about Social Security, you have no right to it. They can take it away. People think that because they're paying into Social Security that there are assets beyond it. No. They're into the future, as the baby boom generation and future generations start living longer. There's going to be more and more of that unless we find an alternative. And we're talking about a way in which you can have an alternative, which means you'll have less in Social Security, less in Medicare, because you'll have the means to cover your own costs. You don't need redistribution through the state or government deficits from the state. You see, we got to get away from that. We got to get away to how do we have a good government that will unite all the people.
That is really cool. I don't know if that's the right word, but
I enjoy your questions. No, your questions were very good.
I think there's so much information here that we don't want to overwhelm you guys. Maybe we can just get a little bit into the last question. I think we still have time. But so one of the topics right now is that CSJ focuses on is that the government isn't really utilizing the true purpose behind the Federal Reserve, what they were intended to do. And so what's happening is actually, this has come up in the news a little, but in February, the chairman of the Federal Reserve is actually up for re-election. And so this kind of goes into that argument of how things are funded in the U.S. using past savings versus future savings. We got a little bit of that, but going into that question is, they don't use the true power of what the Federal Reserve was intended for. Right. So what does that mean?
Good.
What does that mean?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve, you have to go back to 1913 when the Federal Reserve was enacted, Federal Reserve Act. And in Section 13 of the Federal Reserve Act, it gave the power of an independent central bank, independent of government, but it was one that has the power to monetize what they call bills of exchange, also monetize mortgages. They were there to serve the commercial banks, your local banks, who you'd go to for business loans or mortgage loans or other forms of credit. And credit is, as I say, it really comes down to its promises. It can be backed by past accumulations or past savings, or it can be used for future credit, that is promises, promissory notes that are made and accepted by the bank. You come in, this is what we're going to do, and you'll pay for it out of future profits and future savings. Now, when you do that, this is what the Federal Reserve could do, and it is doing right now for employee stock ownership plans, which we were, Louis Kelso and I, my mentor, and I were able to get through the Congress because we found one very powerful senator from Louisiana, Russell Long, and that's what you need. You need leaders, and he did it. He listened to us. We had close to a 4-hour dinner meeting, he picked up the tab. Well, in other words, I never contributed to political campaigns, but he listened. He said, he asked who's against it, and Kelso told him who was against it, and he listened and said, I try to follow this principle since I came into the Senate. I don't care who's right. I care what's right. And he hears, Samuelson and Milton Friedman were against Kelso's ideas without giving good reasons. And so Senator Long said, well, as far as I'm concerned, this is right. Now, what are you people doing about it? And we had the legislature. Kelso was just giving him theory. But then I said, well, Senator, we have this particular law, which was to buy out the old Penn Central, and the workers would be 100% owners if you adopt the ESOP. Oh, so the next day he started promoting it, and sure enough, when the bill was passed, they were supposed to at least do a study to the extent to which. But the problem is in academia, and that is they just don't buy, they don't talk about ownership. It's as if it were irrelevant, except how you redistribute from the rich.
Yeah. Okay?
So, and of course, academia, people's high incomes often come from very wealthy people. So what they teach, they don't teach justice. They don't teach what property is as a fundamental human right. Never teach that. They teach you that at the highest, most fine universities in the world, they teach you the purpose of education is to get a job, and never talk about ownership. And so we have to. So a study was done, and those who came in, they couldn't find anything right about it, about the Kelso ideas, because the government hired people who gave one of the leading investment banking firms and an academic, etc. But then later on, Senator Humphrey held hearings on this, 2 days of hearings, and he was very supportive. He said that expanded capital ownership should be a basic goal beyond full employment, full employment is the policy, the economic policy of the United States. He said, no, here's a twin, let it be a twin policy. In our view, full employment, full work opportunities, yes, but we have to address the fact of ownership. And Senator, we had people from the right, we had some of the most conservative senators supporting us, as well as some from the left. Senator Humphrey was very supportive of the ideas, but really Russell Long was our key person. And then, but now we're saying that's not enough. That the ESOP does deal with a part of America, but we have to talk about everybody. And how America can grow, how we can cut the costs of government down, eliminate, even begin to pay down the deficits. Because behind the money, your question again, behind the money now are not assets. Since we went into the First World War, and started, then we began creating money for the manufacture of war goods in the First World War, and we've been on that path ever since the First World War. And the problem is there should be assets behind the money, and we're talking about assets-backed money. If you want to understand it even more, barter is a form of money. Two people trading different things, where both parties think that they should be of equal value. And then how should you measure money? Buckminster Fuller, who's one of the world design scientists, great thinker, they even named a new element after him. Bucky said it should be kilowatt hours, the cost of a kilowatt hour. That, you know, that everybody in the world, if they're going to survive in today's world, they need new energy sources that are not going to harm the environment. We have to find ways in which the fossil fuels can be kept in the ground for safety, emergency, but we want to get away certainly from coal and other things. And we do have the technology that could do that if, in fact, we begin to finance industries to come up with hydrogen-based energy sources. So again, the answer to your question is we need an asset-backed money that will bring about economic justice for every human being.
I think we'll get the last question real quick. I think we could still do it, but it is the majority of the U.S. or the world doesn't really understand what it means to be an owner.
Right.
I just answered that part for you, Norm. But what does it mean to be an owner, and what comes with it? Example, like what are some of the things, like privileges? What are we talking? Right. Voting rights? What are we talking?
Beautiful. Because that's another. I went through one of the finest law schools in the world, the University of Chicago Law School, and they teach you the law, but they don't teach you justice. But they did teach. In the first day of property, first day you entered law school, one of the courses is going to be on property. And the one thing you learn is property is not the thing you own. It's the rights, powers, privileges, and even limitations, things you can't do with your property. You can't use your property to harm others. So that's one dealing with power, governance power, and also over what you own, the right to control, okay, or share in the control. The second thing, and most important to what we call binary economic theory, as developed by Louis Kelso, is the right to the fruits. Okay? So we're not denying the rich the fruits of what they own. We're just saying that's fine. It's a question of who is going to own additional. You now have accumulated more than enough to meet your needs. So it's beyond your needs. The only reason that you would want it is because you enjoy monopolies. But again, the only legitimate this is what Marx was against, the monopoly. And he was right in being against. And Kelso said, no, Marx, you're wrong in eliminating private property, but we're together on eliminating monopolies. Yeah. You see, and that's the final point is, in order to avoid monopolies, which is concentration, you got to spread out the right of power, power to govern, and the power to the fruits of what you own. Then you're going to have America that is a true model for the rest. For other countries, they will adopt it. Even China, and I've had experiences in China where I was in Beijing and I was interviewed by the Global Times there, owned by the Communist Party, and this fellow just loved what we talked about. And as a matter of fact, on what is it, Facebook or something, on my Facebook page, he put something in there just talking about how wonderful this was. This is a fellow living in communist China, working for the newspaper owned by the Communist Party of China, wow, saying it was a great idea. So I really think it's America. America should wake up to the fact that what you're hearing out of the law, what you're hearing out of economics, what you're hearing out of academia, out of the mass media is garbage.
Uh-huh. That's a good note to end on. No, I'm just kidding. That's yeah. So basically, everything we hear is trash. No, I'm just kidding. No, but I think that's where we're going to end today, guys. One thing I'm going to, hopefully, if I have time, I can get it done today or tomorrow. Make sure to check out on these recordings on the podcast. There's going to be I'm going to upload the green growth paper. This is going to be me just reading. It's a decent article. It's going to probably take me 30 minutes to an hour to read. But the thing we were kind of analyzing is that a lot of people nowadays, including myself, it's not that we view reading as we still realize it's important, it's how you're going to learn, but a lot of us don't have the time. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks, podcasts on the way to work and stuff. And so the green growth paper, it is like a 30-page paper, but some of you guys don't have the time, sit down and read 30 pages. And so I'm going to read it for you guys in a little story time format. No, I'm just kidding. And you guys can just listen to it whenever you want. Make sure to check that out. That's a little homework assignment for you guys. It's going to be the green growth paper. It kind of gives the whole gist of what CESJ is talking about: healthcare reform, tax reform. What does it mean to be an owner? Their phrase, own or be owned. And it will help out a lot. And so make sure to check that out. I'll try, if I have time, I'll get it done today. If not, I'll work my best for tomorrow. But thanks again for listening. We hope you guys have a great day.